I'd like to talk about the miyaldot, the midwives, who Pharaoh gives the job of going down and making sure that all the males all the males among the Hebrew slaves should be killed and only the females to keep alive. Of course, there's a question whether these miyaldot, whether these midwives were Jewish or not. The Rashi, based on the Midrash, seems to imply that this Shifra and Puah, who are the midwives, were actually Yocheved and Miriam, the mother and sister of Moses, which is, of course, it's unusual because you wouldn't expect that Paro would ask a Hebrew to be involved in doing such things. But this is exactly what Rashi brings here on the Miyaldot. He says Shifra is Yocheved and Puah is Miriam. And what is Shifra and Puah? He says Shifra shemishaperet etavalad. In other words, that she knows how to make the help the child become its best in order to make it through, and Puah, that she talks to the newborn and gets it eventually not to cry. But okay, just leave that at that for a moment. Then there's a second issue here, which is, it seems a little bit more complicated, but a very important issue. And that is the place of women in Parshat Shmot. Because women have a very central place in this Parsha. Now, I just mentioned Shifra and Puah, whether they were Yocheved or Miriam or not, but Yocheved and Miriam, in addition to the position of Shifra and Puah, also have a place. Miriam watches over Moses as he's placed in the Nile to make sure that, because he was born secretly, that nobody should know about him, so he was placed in the Nile. And then Pharaoh's daughter, another woman, saves this child, Moses. In this case, Pharaoh's daughter for sure is not Jewish. And she saves Moses. And after she saves Moses, supposedly Miriam walks over to her and says to her, well, maybe I can find somebody from the Hebrews to be a meineket, to be somebody who can wean this child. Says, okay, and that meineket, according to Rashi, was Yocheved, was the mother, the actual mother of the child. So according to this then, so Yocheved and Miriam do have a place in this narrative, and whether they're Shifra and Puah or not, and if they have Shifra and Puah, they have a double place in the narrative. And then, of course, as I said, you have, of course, Batya, as the Midrash calls her, Paro's daughter. I have to explain why they use that name. And then, of course, Moses' wife, Zipporah, who saves Moses' life as they are in that inn on the way down to Egypt. And the angel of death comes to take Moses' life because the child was not his child, was not circumcised. And Zipporah takes a flint and she circumcises the son, and the angel of death disappears. Very, very strange story. Now, before I continue, I want to say, and I'm going to elaborate on this more, it says, B'zchut nashim tzadikaniot yatzanu mimitzrayim. By the merit of righteous women were we able to leave Egypt. And people like using this just to say, well, women have their place and women, this is a very deep concept. That redemption and salvation must begin with the female. This is elaborated in Kabbalistic literature. I will get to this in a moment, but I want to talk first about Shifra and Puah. Something unusual about them. Shifra and Puah are called miyaldot, which is usually translated as, of course, miyaldot comes from the Hebrew word yeled, which means a child, and leyaled means to bring a child into the world. So basically, they are midwives. Now, Onkelos, one of our early translations of the Torah in Aramaic, and our first sanctioned translation of the Torah into another language aside from Hebrew, because the Septuagint was sanctioned by Ptolemy, but not by, it was agreed to by the Jews, but they felt that we were forced to keep it, and that's why they didn't actually keep the Septuagint in our tradition. But it was kept outside our tradition. But Onkelos definitely is a sanctioned translation and will be used in the synagogues in Babylonia on the Sabbath. Just like to this day, the Yemenite Jews use Onkelos to translate the Torah verse by verse on Shabbat. So Onkelos translates miyaledet as chayata. Chayata, like the word chayim, which means life. Those who bring life, they're helping to bring life. They're the midwives. So just bringing a child, bringing life, chayata. Then interestingly enough, when the midwives go to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, why didn't you kill the sons? So the midwife say to Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptians. They are chayot, which literally means they are like wild animals. But even before the midwife comes, they already will have given birth. Now Rashi translates chayot, he says, as a midwife, because in Aramaic, chayata is a midwife. So he doesn't translate it as animal, he translated they're like midwives, they know exactly what to do. The strange thing, however, is that Onkelos translates chayot hena as chakimaya, they are smart. Even though Onkelos himself translates midwife, mialedet, as chayata. So why can't he translate chayot hena, which seems to be the same word, also chayata, they are midwives? Why does he translate it? They are smart. So the simple meaning possibly would mean that for Onkelos, because the Hebrew women had to learn how to survive, and slaves have to learn survival techniques. So one of the survival techniques, when you don't have a hospital, you don't have professional midwives, you have to play the role, you have to learn how to do it yourself. So chakimaya, they're smart, which means they're street smart. They know all these things. They know how to live in the wild, just like animals who know how to live in the wild and don't have midwives. So it actually goes together. Rashi also brings that, by the way. They're like animals, mean they know how to live. Yeah, he doesn't say it in that way. He just brings from Jacob's blessing to the children about names of different animals. But I think it's obvious to mean that just as animals in the wild, so same thing, it's a survival technique. And that's why I think that Onkelos uses the term here, chakimaya, meaning they're not professional midwives. They are just they have the ability to adapt and to do these things by themselves. One other thing I just want to throw in, which I think is interesting about this idea. Another possibility when Onkelos might say that these midwives, that the Hebrew women, when they say their chayot are chakimaya, uses the word chacham, which means wise, because we do have in Pirkei Avot, it says, Ezeu chacham, who is the wise person? Haroeh et hanolad, who is able to see what is going to happen in the future. But it literally means who is able to see something being born. And who sees something being born? The midwives. That's their job. They keep seeing something being born. And I think this analogy, by the way, between wisdom and a midwife is very important. I think at least 3 things can be learned from it about what wisdom really is. Wisdom is the ability to be optimistic, to see the good within the vicissitudes of life, which is not always easy. How do I know that? Because children, there are going to be children who will be born defected with difficulties, but most children are born okay. So you have to learn how to see optimism in the challenges of life. Secondly, you could say about Chacham, Ezeu Chacham haroeh et hanolad. The second idea here is that wisdom is just like the birth of a child. You don't know where it's coming from because it wasn't here before. It's like a new idea. Wisdom is new ideas. They're that sort of light bulb that lights over your head when the new idea comes into the world. It's a very creative moment, real wisdom. However, even new idea that comes into your head, it comes from your surroundings. That baby did come from a human being, from two human beings, but it was housed by one of them. And more than that. But the idea is that new ideas do pop in, but they are related to the world. They're not from beyond the world. So that's aspect number 2. Aspect number 3 is that wisdom in this Chakimai is translating chayot, which means they are living beings. Because wisdom is about trying to look for the significance of life. That is the point of wisdom in this world. And ultimate wisdom is looking for the significance within a life. And of course, it's also haroetun hanolad. If you understand the world well, you can also predict what's going to be happening, because unfortunately, people are sort of predictable. So anyhow, that's what I want to say about shifra and Puah and the connection to their being midwives. Now, let me go back to what I started with, the relationship of women to the Geulah. As I said, that the Talmud already says that by the merit of righteous women did we leave Egypt. But what I'm saying is, what I'm saying is that the pattern in Kabbalistic thinking is it starts with the feminine before it goes to the masculine. It must be a woman which helps us get out of Egypt, just like you needed Esther to solve the problem in the book of Esther, but there are other aspects to that too. But it's the woman that does it. Now, which woman are we talking about here? If you notice, most of these women relate to Moses. Yocheved is his mother, and she is the one, of course, who will be involved in order to wean this child. And according to Rashi, she's also shifra. Miriam, Moses' sister, who is the one who meets Pharaoh's daughter, and which helps save Moses. And according to the Midrash and Rashi, she's also Puah. And then, of course, you have Zipporah, Moses' wife, who saves his life. And then, of course, Pharaoh's daughter, who Chazal called Batya, who definitely saved Moses' life. The one non-Jew in the story. We're assuming Zipporah, because she's Moses' wife, so she's now involved within the Jewish people, because this is before Sinai, and that's its discussion by itself. But definitely you have all the women involved in getting things going are involved here in some way, at least according to the Midrash, with Moses. Now, one other thing I have to say about this. In Tikunei Zohar, which is part of the Zoharic literature, Moses is called the main aspect of the Messiah. Because, like it says in Yaakov says about Yehuda, Yehuda tayaducha achecha yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha, lo yasur shevet miYehuda mechokek min ben raglav ad ki yavo Shilo. The scepter of royalty will not leave Judah until the time of Shiloh. Rashi brings, again, that Shiloh is the gematria of Moshe, because the kingdom is ultimately until the Messianic time, and even the Messianic king is related to Moshe. He is the first redeemer, Hu Goel Rishon, Hu Goel Acharon. He is the first redeemer, and he's the eventual redeemer. All the redemptions relate to the idea of Moses, capitalistically. In Tikkunei Zohar, there's a sort of the way that the idea of the messiahs are depicted is like a bird. The body of the bird is Moses. One hand, which would be, in this particular case, the left hand would be, the left wing would be the Messiah, the house of Joseph, and the right wing, well, it depends on how you look at it. It could be the, anyhow, one wing is the Messiah, the house of Joseph, and the other wing is the Messiah, the house of David. And, but the idea is that it's all related to Moses. That's why Moses is Rashi Tevot, is an acronym, Ma Shehaya Hu Shehiyeh, what was, will be. It's the idea of Moses, what we call the spiritual concept, or in Kabbalistic literature, the shifra of Tiferet, which relates directly to Moses. Now, so what are the women? In the Kabbalah of the Sfirot, you have two main female aspects. One is called Bina in the Sfirot, and one is called Malchut. Bina is called the mother, and Malchut is called the daughter. I'm sorry for using Kabbalistic lingo, but this is the best way to explain this idea. In other words, in Kabbalistic literature, the Geula itself, the power of redemption is called Bina, and it's also called the mother. It's called Em al Habanim, the mother of the children. And the daughter, Shekhinah, is called the daughter. And the Shekhinah is the divine presence over the people of Israel. So that Yocheved, the mother, and Miriam, her daughter, become two aspects of the redemption, because the redemption is the mother hovering over the children, which is called the daughter in Kabbalistic literature, the Shekhinah, in order to pull them out. In fact, it says in the Talmud, wherever the Jews went, the Shekhinah went with them, the divine presence. And the Shekhinah will return with them. And then when the Shekhinah returns with them, they're back in their mother's house. So you have then this idea that you have the mother and the daughter of Moses, and of course the wife, because Moses' wife is also a mother, which is called the redemptive idea, and she saves the son, right? Again, the salvation, the Geula. And then you have Pharaoh's daughter. Now, where did Pharaoh's daughter come into this? And notice Pharaoh's daughter is also called the daughter, because in Hebrew, the Midrash gives her the name Bat Yah, the daughter of God. What is that all about? I'll tell you another idea, which you might find surprising. In order for this Geula to happen, salvation to happen, there must be people among the non-Jews who also collaborate with the Jewish people. Because remember, God is the God of the whole world, not just of the Jews. We call God the God of Israel, and we're very happy about our lot. But of course, the God is all God of all nations, of course. And remember, when Moses wants to take the Jews out of Egypt, says to God, okay, let's go. Says, no, God says, I have 10 plagues I have to send upon this people. I'm sure Moses is thinking, why 10 plagues? Let's just do it. And God says, V'yadu Mitzrayim ki ani Hashem. I want the Egyptians to know that I'm God, not just the Israelites. So this is a narrative which is part of the redemption itself. Just like you have those Egyptians who are helping the Jews leave, just how you have the Arab Rav who joins the Jews upon their leaving, the ultimate redemption happens when there's also collaboration with non-Jews. And that's called Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, who actually saves Moses. So I just wanted to point this out And I want to keep this Dvar Torah short. I wanted to talk about shifra and Puah. Wanted to talk about the idea that there's always a feminine aspect which is necessary, and these are the women who are the impetus, who push things forward in order for the redemption to happen. And this happens not just in the Egypt story, but over history. The collaboration from the non-Jews, which is very important. That's why we needed Cyrus, Koresh, to tell us that we could go to the land of Israel. We needed the Balfour Declaration to help us get come back to the land of Israel. This collaboration, which I'm not going to go into Kabbalistic lingo because I don't want it to get more complicated, but this collaboration is the meeting point between the Shekhinah and between the nations. And only this collaboration can really make this happen correctly. Anyhow, I want to wish everybody Shavua Tov, have a great week. This is one of the things I want to see from last week's Parsha. Shalom, shalom.